Welcome back to the On Adventure podcast. I'm Josh Self, and I'll be your host. My guest today is Clay Sanders. Clay was introduced to me from a previous guest. You probably heard Terry Foxworth. Terry introduced me to Clay, and I'm really glad that he did. There are conversations that I have that just stand out as unique because of their wisdom and weight the guest brings, and I would say Clay fits that bill. He's a great storyteller. You will also find out that he is a great story capturer. And one of his adventures highlights this fact very well. But what you also hear is how Clay turned one of the most tragic events that could happen to a family and to a parent into something that became a beautiful effort to reduce the suffering in the world in the same way that his son was doing as well. I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation and probably will be disappointed that it's over, just as I was when my time with Clay came to an end. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Clay Sanders. Well, Clay Sanders, welcome to the On Adventure podcast. And, I've talked earlier this week. We've got a mutual friend and one of my previous guests, Terry. So I appreciate him making the connection with us. And I get to be jealous again today because you're out in Colorado and I'm not. So welcome to the podcast. And
well, thank
I appreciate
you, Josh.
you joining me.
Yeah, it's great to be here, and I appreciate Terry connecting us.
Yeah, so why don't you maybe give a little history, background of who you are, how you made your way out to Colorado from Western North Carolina, and anything else you want to add in there about yourself.
Well, sure. Just very briefly, I'm retired now as of 2017. Prior to that, we lived in Western North Carolina for my whole practice life of 29 years. And we raised 4 children there, my wife and I, Beth. And we decided after some consideration and various trips out here that we would like to try living in Colorado. We tried it part-time for a year or two and then pulled up the stakes from North Carolina and came out here. I was a dentist for my career. We had, I think I mentioned, 4 children who are scattered around now, but they are all east of the Mississippi. So we are the outlier out west. And so we venture back east fairly often. My folks are still there, and some siblings and their families. So on the whole, everybody is back east, not all in North Carolina, but we make trips back fairly regularly for that reason. But yeah, that's a quick synopsis.
How difficult was it to make a transition to really totally different part of the country? It's still something you're getting settled into, or how has that gone for you?
Well, it's gone well. As far as easy or hard, I would say it's a mix. It was, once we made the decision, it was, part of the adventure, and we were in that honeymoon phase of retirement for the first year or two. And so it was just part of an adventure to come out here. Of course, originally we still had the stakes, and we still had our place back in North Carolina. So we had our roots there still. The decision to pull up and come here full-time was not so much that we enjoyed it out here more. We really liked Western North Carolina and still do. But the feeling that if we wanted to sink into a community and really get engaged and really feel a part of it, then we were going to have to be here most of the time, and not just kind of come in quickly and leave after a few weeks or months and head back to North Carolina. So it was a little bit harder to make that decision, but once made, it was pretty easy. I'd say the first year or two, the logistical part of it. The part I didn't quite anticipate is sort of the emotional side of it. I mentioned all our family and, decades of friends are back east, and, we try to maintain relationships and of course do mostly, but it's harder. And so that kind of came along after a year or two of being out here, that I started noticing that was a bit of a disadvantage that I don't know that I fully appreciated when we made the decision.
And you're in Salida, Colorado?
Salida, Colorado. It's South Central Colorado, yes. in the
Awesome.
Arkansas Valley. Some people might have heard of Buena Vista or Leadville. They are in the same valley as we are.
Yeah, right along there, the collegiate peaks and
Exactly. Yeah. So
yeah.
we're in Chaffee County, which has the distinction of housing the most 14,000-foot mountains in the country. We have 8 or 9 just in the county
Oh
proper.
my gosh.
There's only 54, 55, 56 in Colorado. Depends on how you count. That's getting into the weeds a little bit, and it doesn't really matter, but mid 50s. And we have 8 or 9 of them, I guess, in this county, Chaffee County.
That makes for some pretty easy views, I'm sure, from the
It
house or
is.
somewhere close.
Yeah, it is. Back east, it's much more verdant. The greens are greener and maybe richer and more varied and more predominant. We do have a fair bit of green here, but it's nothing like the Carolinas. But you can see a long ways. So we're in the valley at 7,500 feet, which always
Oh
amuses
wow.
me because Mount Mitchell, the highest peak in the east, is 60, 68 or something like that. So
Yeah.
I'm standing talking to you right now in a valley taller than, another several hundred feet above Mount Mitchell. That amuses me. But I'm looking up at some 14,000 footers in the Sawatch Range, a collegiate range
Okay.
of mountains. And that's actually, I love being able to look in the distance like that and love being able to look up at the mountains like that.
Yeah. I just finished a conversation this morning with a podcast guest that'll be released in a few weeks, but he just finished through hiking the Appalachian Trail, and you may know this also, but the Appalachian Trail is also known as the Green Tunnel, for
Mm-hmm.
like what you were just referring to. It's just trees and green, on top of each other, and it's part of the beauty of
Mm-hmm.
this part of the country. But when you're hiking those trails, you get a vista every now and then, but it's certainly not, probably like your hike this morning that you could see 360 degrees around you at every point.
Right. And here, of course, the elevations go up high enough that you get at around 11,500 to 700, that range, you get above tree line. And once you're above tree line, it's, of course, a different experience of
Yeah.
anything that you can have back east. Okay, I take that back. I guess I'm thinking now the White Mountains in New Hampshire. And
Yeah.
I guess, for all practical purposes, you are above tree line because you're walking in the open. And I guess the weather dictates that there. But on the whole, you have to be out somewhere where the mountains get tall enough to
Yeah. Just
rise
different
above that.
experience for sure.
It is. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a couple things I'm really excited to talk to you about, and what I want to spend a little bit of time before we get into those is some of your experiences getting into really hard things. So long distance running and ultra marathons, and where you took it from there. And I am curious how a dentist gets into those kinds of things. So which one came first? Is it something, did the adventure pursuits come after you got into practice, or was this something that kind of goes back further in your life?
I'd say I probably always had an interest in the outdoors and doing things that were maybe considered a little more exciting or a little more adventurous. I remember back in high school, a friend and I building a hang glider. I remember in college, I took up climbing. I was never a good climber, but I did take it up, and that's not of a lot of interest to some people, or
Right.
any interest to some. Got a scuba license, so I did a variety of things. I loved backpacking. You mentioned the AT. I've done some fair bit of that, not all of it by any means,
Mhm.
but a number of bigger sections of a variety of trails. And so, yeah, I think it was always sort of just how I was wired. I enjoy adventurous things, and in particular, adventurous things in the outdoors. Now, I do think there's a lot of adventurous things you can do that maybe you would distinguish and not maybe necessarily call them part of the outdoors or part of nature. But I always tended to be attracted to things in nature, or experiences that you might have in the outdoors. I was a skydiver for a while.
You didn't say no to many things, it sounds like.
No, I guess not. I was never much of a river person. I tried
Okay.
kayaking for a while, but I was never any good. So I can't even comment on that. It was exciting. I probably almost drowned a couple times, and then not literally, but felt like it. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
may not have followed up with that interest. But yeah, so I would say that those sorts of things came first, and becoming a dentist just was. I recognize that does not necessarily sound like the two would go together, but I will say I know a lot of dentists that are equally interested in adventurous activities as myself. Though the career itself, I will fully admit, is scratches some other itches, uh,
Mm,
not
yeah.
necessarily that type. We tried to make everything as predictable as
Right.
possible in our office versus what happens in the outdoors where you try
Yeah.
to control risk, but things are a lot more unpredictable.
Well, I think that's interesting though that you had both of those in your life, both the predictability and the unpredictable. Sometimes I see the consistency stays in both, right? People love the craziness of the adventure, but then their professional life is just as crazy. There's not much consistency to it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting that
Mm-hmm.
you had it siloed. Everything had a place. And
Well, Josh, that's very interesting you said that. I had not actually looked at it that way at all. But I think there's some wisdom in that they sort of balanced each other out a
yeah,
bit.
yeah.
Because yes, everything I was doing in the office was always trying to make, creating systems and doing everything we could to make everything as predictable and perfect
Hmm.
as we could for the patient experience, both technically and emotionally.
Does one of those two feel more natural to you?
It's a good question. Standing here right now, listening to that question, my gut response is no. They feel like they're both integral parts of me, and that they're woven together in a way that I really can't tease them apart. Though you have identified that they get expressed in different realms.
But
That's
I'm sure
that's very interesting.
there's probably some overlap though, because I mean and I haven't done things near to the scale that you have, but anytime you get into an unpredictable feat or pursuit, you do try to find ways to build the systems in there, or where can I find the predictability? What can I hang my hat on and know that that's going to be there when I need it? And that gives some grounding or stability for all of the other unpredictability that comes along. And I have to imagine that maybe you were born with some of these tendencies, but a lot of times those come from experience and from stretching little by little into more and more uncomfortable places. Would you say that that's a fair description of how has worked for you? Although you said you built a hang glider in high schools, so that sounds like you were into unpredictability pretty early.
Well, you have identified, yes, I would say that my tendency and predisposition towards trying to control things that can be controlled is it permeates the adventure side of life as well. And maybe one of the reasons I like the adventure is that I can't. It allows that
Oh yeah,
unpredictability.
yeah.
But you are quite right in my preparation for. So I've done the Leadville 100 ultra race, a running race. Yes, that was very programmed and intentional and thought through. It was not a spontaneous sort of let's go try this and I'll just do the best I can type of approach. And neither were either the other. We may talk about it in a little bit, but an adventure across country on a type of bicycle called an elliptigo that was very planned and thought through as well. And you're right, you do those things both for safety reasons, but also
Mhm.
to make it more enjoyable and to be prepared. But I think part of the charm of adventure life and being out in nature is you don't know what you're going to encounter. It might be a little bit, this may be stretching it, but maybe it's a little bit like playing classical music where the notes, you're trying to perfect them and the notes are on the
Mhm.
page and you're really trying to get or playing jazz where you're
Yeah.
improvising. And part of the joy in the jazz, even if it's as technically or maybe even more technically demanding is the unpredictability, not really knowing what's around the next bend in the river, the next bend in the trail, the next rise in the trail, and going over to see what's on the other side, and just always wondering what's ahead.
Yeah, I love that comparison. That is a great analogy. And I think that's something that'll stick with me. And you mentioned the Leadville 100. For anyone that doesn't know, that is notoriously a pretty brutal race, and you can only prepare for that so much. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you were still living in North Carolina
Yes.
when
Yeah.
you did that race.
Yes, we were. And so, yeah, all the preparation was, in that 3,500 to 6,000 feet of elevation or of altitude. And the altitude of this race, it starts in Leadville, which is at 10,200 feet. The highest it goes is just a little shy of 13,000 feet on Hope Pass. And the lower it does drop down to Winfield, which is at about 9,200 feet. But the whole race in the end takes place between about 9 to 13,000 feet. So it's preparing
How
for
did you
that.
train in North Carolina and still survive a 100-mile race at that kind of elevation?
Well, that is definitely one of the challenges of Leadville. And there's a number of other Western races that get quite high as well. Some even top out higher than Leadville now, but Leadville is just one of the notorious. It's been around second longest. I think Western States was first, and then Leadville. Yeah. So it started in maybe 1984 or something like that. Don't hold me to the history, but as far as preparing, you getting in shape is the same anywhere. So first, you just have to be able to get in shape well enough that you can do the miles. Yeah. And that would transfer from anywhere. The additional challenge then becomes that you're doing it with less oxygen when you get out here. Because at 10,000 feet, it's something like, I'm probably going to misremember this, but around 10,000 feet, my memory is, versus sea level, that's about 20% less oxygen. Wow. And I mean, it's definitely noticeable. So your pace changes, and you just have to accept that mentally as well and just be prepared for that. But I will say that part of it, used to be, I don't know if it's still out there, this idea that one of the ways to handle it was just to show up like the day before the race and go do it. And that was in some of the advice that wasn't the only advice I was given, but that was a piece of advice that I read. That just didn't make sense to me physiologically. So we were out here for going to end about 3 weeks, but in this valley for 2 weeks prior to the race. And I can guarantee from my own, I'm just an N of one, but I can guarantee you that I would not have finished it had I not done that.
Yeah. So after a
week or so, I started. Yeah, it was. I mean, the first day we stayed with some friends at 8,500 feet and outside of BV, Buena Vista. Took a walk up a hill outside in their neighborhood, their street, a dirt road. It rose maybe 500 feet over the course of a mile. And I was lightheaded and faint and I didn't feel sick, but I felt like, oh my gosh, what have I done? I mean, I can barely walk up this thing, and I can't walk up this thing and even feel normal. Well, over the course of the next week and then 2 weeks, I did feel good. The oxygen level is still less, but the subjective experience of that is improved.
I gotcha.
And you start to get used to that. So
and that took about a week to 2 weeks for you to feel somewhat normal doing that?
I can only speak for myself. I would say after a week, I was doing, some 10-mile training runs again and feeling pretty comfortable. They were slower. If you looked at your watch and you were going to try to do what you did back east or back at lower elevations, even if that was not east, could have been west too, but closer to sea level, you would be either extremely disappointed or somewhat mortified by how it would feel to try to do the same pace. But you slow down and just kind of gauge, run by feel. And that's what I did in the race. And I actually did it more conservatively than I ended up needing to. So Josh, I can tell you, it's still one of the top experiences of my life. And I
Really?
tell some people this, and I don't know that they believe me, but I'll say it again because it's true. I finished the race at 100, the 100 was 103 miles in the end. Jokingly, I'll tell folks that the first 100 miles were a breeze. It was that last 5K that was the killer. But really, experientially, finishing the race, I wanted to keep going. I didn't want it to end. It was just one of these magic, wonderful, I don't know where the energy was from. It doesn't mean I felt fantastic through the whole thing. I didn't.
Yeah.
But overall, the experience was so good. I just wanted it to keep going, which
And had you done anything
admit,
that long up to that point?
No. The longest I'd gone was a training race. Really, it was 100K. It was actually a 12-hour race to see how far you could go in 12 hours. And it was 5K loops in the woods.
No, wow.
And I ended up doing 100 kilometers by, I think it was 11 hours and 40 minutes. And there wasn't enough time for me to finish another loop, and they didn't count partial loops. So I stopped then. But that was the longest I'd gone to that point, and that was a few months before Leadville. It was 100 kilometers, which is 62 miles.
So what made you, one, decide that you wanted to do a 100-mile race, and two, pick Leadville as the one that you're going to do?
Gosh, well, I'd been a runner for a lot of my life. Some of it was off and on as we're raising the kids. I'm always one of these compulsive people that kept track of mileage and that sort of thing. Any training I've done, I still have all my logs, which is
a good scientist.
It does seem a bit bizarre to me now. I admit, now that I'm not into that world anymore, but as of the last 3 or 4 years, I'm not. But I would run. Running was sort of my thing, running and biking. And as the kids got older and were doing their things, and some were off in college by this point, I just got interested in what would happen. I'd done a number of marathons, I don't know, maybe 30 or so of them. And
that's a lot.
But then I might train for a marathon, run a marathon, and then I might not run much for a few months. It was very variable until the last 10 years or so of when I was older and the kids weren't taking up as much time. Then I started becoming more regular and better with training, and even got a coach. And anyway, I just became curious about an ultra, and Leadville popped up on the list as being we love the West. And I thought that was the one that inspired me. It's just grabbed my attention. And so I entered a 50K in January of the year I did Leadville. Leadville is run in August. And I decided I didn't train for the 50K. I mean, I'd been training just generally for running, and had been racing other races. But I decided if I finish this and I feel okay on very little training, then maybe I will sign up for Leadville and just see what I can do. And the 50K went well. And so, yeah, I had a coach that was helped me through the training steps. I really didn't have to think much, Josh. It was just go out and do. And by that time this was 2013, I was half time in my career. I was working half time. I had a partner, and I dropped back to just working mornings basically. And so I had more time is the point, and for training, because to do this, if you're going to really do it, try to do it well. Mostly what I read and my experience was every week was in the 18 to 22 hours of training range. Yeah. It wasn't all running. There was some swimming and biking, because I was also into triathloning then as well. And I think that the complementary movements of those other sports was helpful, not a deterrent. But I had the time, and it was, it's just what struck me and inspired me. And, sometimes we don't even know why we are interested in things. If we really have to pick it apart, sometimes it can kind of fall apart. Well, it just is. It's just, I'd like to do it. And that's how it was for me, really, with Leadville. There was no other overriding or underlying reason that I should go do that.
Well, and I think that's really cool that you said by the end of the race, you didn't want it to stop. That, kind of in that flow state, and all the hormones are firing, and the good feeling of a huge accomplishment. How has that carried over into the things that you've done since then? If you haven't done another 100-mile race, has it kept pushing you in the direction of still doing big races or big feats?
Well, I stayed in the ultra running world for a while. My favorite distance became 50 miles.
Okay.
Reason being, you start pretty much at daybreak and you're done before dinner. So you get a good meal and you get a nice bed that night. Whereas if you're doing the longer events like Leadville, you go through, or people at my pace anyway would go through the night. The winners would finish sometime during the night, but that wasn't where I was at. I was just, so anyway, I stayed in that ultra running world, and yeah, I just really enjoyed racing and the competition side of it. I mean, ultra running is a very collegial competition.
Mm-hmm.
It's everyone's very supportive. You're racing against each other in one sense, sort of. I mean, you are. If you're trying to get place, then you're definitely racing against
Mm-hmm.
your peers. However, in my experience, it was just a very friendly, helpful, supportive community, and really liked that community.
Yeah. It's
And
pretty
kept that up
unique.
until, and I would probably still be doing it, except back in 2020, I tore a right meniscus, the knee meniscus, right knee, and it tore badly enough. And they did surgery, but they had to take out enough of it that I was unable to run again.
Oh, wow.
Though admittedly, the surgeon told me that at the beginning. I did try for the next 9 months to bring it
Prove them
back.
wrong.
Sort of.
Yeah.
I mean, just because I didn't care whether he ended up knowing or not. I just wanted to continue running. It'd been so much a part of my life. And, that is a funny thing. I mean, here I'm 65 years old now, but it's funny what we discover our identity, what creates our identity, our self-identity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for one of the big things, of course, is your profession, especially if you stick with something for a long time and aren't changing much. With dentistry, I mean, you become a dentist, and that's what you are, and that's what you do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying some people don't get out of it, but I'm saying it's not like you can transition to something that's related, really. The point being, I was a dentist a long time, so I had a lot of my identity tied up into that. And you hear about this in retirement, that that's something people have to deal with and think about. And I discovered, yes, that's true. But one of the things I did not really expect was how much I thought of myself as a runner. So when I lost that, it took me, Josh, it took me several years to get that out of my mind, out of my heart, out of my sense of who I am.
Yeah.
And
How
some
did
of
you
it,
do that? How did you?
time.
Was it?
For me, it just took time. I mean, I knew I couldn't, once I tried, if I hadn't tried to get back, maybe it would have been different, but I did try. I tried hard and kept having bad flare-ups with it that kept telling me, no, you can't do this. No, you can't do this. And explored some alternative therapies, and none of those were going to work. So I didn't go down quietly. And so I did have that experience of, fighting to keep it, but I don't think I really realized how much it would impact me. I mean, in the end, it's just a hobby. I'm not saying it's a better or worse hobby. I'm not comparing it to any other hobby, but it is just a hobby.
Right.
And it's not like something I needed to do, but it was really something that had gotten woven into my self-concept in a way that I did not appreciate until it was taken away.
I can completely relate with that. And I run enough that I consider myself a runner, although I don't do huge distances. I've done some triathlons for several years. So, I consider
cool.
myself
Yeah.
a bit of an athlete, not anywhere near the top, but what started out as something to get in shape did turn into, well, I'm a triathlete. I do triathlons, and I'm a runner. And I because of my day job as a financial planner and working mostly with people that are making this transition into a post-work life, I see it over and over again. I haven't had the opportunity for those kinds of things that I identify yet to be taken away, but I know it's coming. I know there will be a day that I can't do the things that I do today at 45 years old. And I may be a little more aware of that than most 45-year-olds because of my job, but I still don't know how I'm going to, how to prepare for that. And, you know, you and I talked earlier this week, one of the books that we've both read is David Brooks' Second Mountain. And that comes to mind a little bit of when the thing that we've identified with, or the thing that was successful in the first part of life, which is the first mountain metaphor, no longer works for us, or actually becomes counterproductive, like you continuing to try to run and continuing to hurt yourself, then finding the second mountain, which is more of a mountain of purpose, more a mountain of using the wisdom that's been attained. So, and I hear that in the little bit that I know of your story too, that you've transitioned to doing some other things that have a purpose to them other than you just staying in shape. So I want to, this is probably a perfect transition into your trip across the country on an elliptigo. Is it called an elliptigo bicycle or just an elliptigo machine? Because I'd never heard of this thing before you mentioned it a couple of days ago.
Yeah, well, the funny thing was, I did. It is just an elliptigo. I mean, I think people would know what you're saying that knew what an elliptigo was if you said elliptigo bike. But the elliptigo is like if you can picture going to the gym and getting on an elliptical machine, with the exception of the arms. The arms now become the handlebars.
Okay.
And you're standing up on this device, maybe a foot over the ground, but your feet are making a stroke very similar to an elliptical action on the machine. And to back up just a little bit, I thought of myself mostly as a runner. I had done a number of triathlons. I lost the running, but the big precipitating event, and really the only reason I did what I'm about to describe or what we're about to talk about, was that one of our 4 children had fought substance use disorder for 10 years. And he eventually died from that in 2019. His name was Joel Kenneth Sanders. And I won't go into all to distract from the theme of our story, except to say that it's the most transformational, traumatic event that we've been through in our lives. It puts a lot of things in perspective, and a lot of these other things that might have seemed important at one time to me, they've kind of fell away as not seeming having near the importance that I was attributing to them. But one of the things I wanted to do is, he was clean the last couple of years. It was opioids, and he eventually died from an opioid, fentanyl. You hear a lot about it today, but it was around then, just not quite as prevalent. And he relapsed and died. He was a truck driver, or had become truck driver in one of the rehabs that he had been in for about 10 months, and he got a CDL and became a truck driver. And so he's crossing the country back and forth. And so I became inspired to wanted to continue his story. His last couple of years of being clean, he was really doing a lot of work to try to help others that struggled with the same affliction that he did. And I wanted to continue his work and honor him, and try to address what I saw as one of the primary problems restricting both treatment acceptance, people seeking treatment, societal attitudes, and that's the stigma around substance use disorder. So I came down to a name and a project, and the name that I was calling it was In Joel's Steps, which still exists. And it was to raise funds and awareness around the issue of substance use disorder, telling Joel's story, listening to others' stories. And the crossing the country was to simulate his crossing the country repeatedly in his truck.
That's really
I wanted
cool.
to do it in a way that would draw some attention, not to myself, but to the cause. And so initially I was going to run across the country, but it was in that early 2020 that soon after I conceived the idea and was starting to train for it, that I had the meniscal tear in the knee that then prohibited the doing of it. I was going to do it in 2020, and we know what happened in 2020. So
Yeah.
I pushed it out to 2021, but I wasn't sure how I was going to do it. And I'd been a triathlete like you. We were talking about that. And so I like biking. So biking was sort of my second event. Swimming, I confess I only did because I like to do triathlons. I was never a great swimmer or particularly fond of it. But the biking, I thought about biking across the country, but I was really looking for some way that would draw more attention. And in our little town here of Salida in March of 2021, I still hadn't decided how I was going to do it. I was thinking about doing it as a triathlon across the country, doing a half Ironman triathlon every day. And when I couldn't find a swimming place to swim, to have a rowing machine that I would row a certain distance and time on. And so I was playing with a lot of ideas, but I was walking downtown and saw a father taking his kid to school. And here in our little town of 5,000 people, people bike a lot to school. And he was with his elementary school kid who was on a bike, and he was on this thing, the Elliptigo.
Really?
I had never seen one before. So this is March, and I'm thinking of trying to start this in July. And I still wasn't sure how I was doing it. But I saw that and I found out who he was. I didn't stop him on the spot. It just sort of, I watched in amazement as he went by, and it more simulates running in that you're standing up, but it looked gentle enough on the knee, the elliptical motion. And I already knew I could do an elliptical because I've been doing it in the gym.
Yeah.
I found out who it was. He loaned me one of his ellipticos. He had 9 of them.
Why?
He just was really infatuated with them. But at any rate, he loaned me one. And after a couple of days, I realized, yeah, I think this would work. So I bought one, ordered one, and then for the next 3 months prepared on the Elliptigo. Prior to that, I had been doing a lot of hiking and biking to try to get ready, even though I wasn't sure how I was crossing the country. So I started in San Francisco sometime in July and finished in Charleston, South Carolina. The reason for that was that our son Joel had a son who lives in Charleston.
Oh my goodness.
And so I
That's
used
cool.
for a lot of the route, I used one of the transcontinental mapped, already, vetted routes.
Mm-hmm.
But in, I don't know, Kentucky or so, I think when I entered Kentucky, I varied and started dropping down because I wanted to go through Asheville and Hendersonville, which is where Joel grew up, and then make my way down to Charleston. And you mentioned Terry earlier. He joined me for the last leg of that. He joined me from Asheville to Charleston, which was great to have company. A couple other times I would have someone join me, maybe for a day or two. But most of it I was on my own with my wife, Beth, who drove a camper trailer on ahead to whatever the destination was. And so we camped along the way, the whole way. But it was in a camper.
Yeah.
It was a very small RV, a little Airstream base camp, they're called. But
that's cool.
So
yeah, I think Terry, did that line up with when he was biking across the country with his daughter? Was that the same time?
He was a little ahead of me and taking a different route, but we were both out on our respective vehicles.
Okay.
He the bicycle and me the Elliptigo. Yeah. We started in different places, but the routes did meet up, maybe into Kansas or so. Then he got onto Highway 50, which I was on a lot.
But didn't he have to get picked up early because there was a hurricane coming or something?
He left the route maybe somewhere in Missouri or something is my memory, but then he came back and did a section again to get him to Asheville,
Mm-hmm.
but he had not finished to the coast, and he still wanted to.
Okay.
He wasn't
I
planning
remember
this, but when I showed up in Asheville and we got together with some other friends, it was like, well, Terry, why don't you join us the last few days and finish up your trip? And he did. So that was great. It was spur of the moment for him, and
How about that?
he popped on his bike the next day or two
Yeah.
after we first talked about it and did the last few hundred miles together.
Wow.
But yes, the project was in Joel's steps, and my tagline or message for that was addiction is a treatable brain disease that disables decision making, and its stigma handicaps its prevention and treatment. So I was trying to focus on it is a medical situation. Some of us are about 10% of the population is more predisposed to it. Not all that 10% are going to succumb. Not all that 10% are exposed or even, feel the need. But I would tell people, Joel got started when he got a prescription when he was in college for benzodiazepines and for anxiety, which we didn't even know about. And because of the way HIPAA laws are in college,
Oh my goodness.
we weren't even told that he was being put on this.
You had no idea.
No idea. I mean, I'm not trying to say, well, okay, well, we would have, I don't know, we would have definitely stepped in some way. I don't at that point, but he wasn't addicted to anything at that point, but it did make him feel in a way that he was wired in a way that he quickly started falling down that hole of experimenting with other substances, and then he was ensnared. And so then I compare myself, and I don't actually drink alcohol anymore, but for decades I would have, maybe a glass of wine a night or something like that, or got to liking craft beers, and I might have one craft beer a night, or at least many nights. That's all I ever wanted. It's not like I'd have one and I think, oh boy, I wish I could have another, but I better resist.
Yeah.
It's just, no, I just not wired that way. It was not something, it was not a hole I was going to fall down. So that was part of my messaging, was just trying to bring awareness that it is a brain affliction, a brain disease, but it is treatable. It disables decision-making, which creates some of the awful behavior that you can see from substance use disorder afflictees. And its stigma, societal attitudes about it, detrimentally affect the prospects for treatment and for prevention. Both people seeking treatment, families, being open about the situation and trying to help the person that's suffering with it in their family by helping to get them medical help, just because of the stigma. We still have some friends that still to this day, have had our experience of a child dying from that, but they still will not say that's what it was. And it's just because of
that's the
stigma, and
stigma.
they feel that there's some sort of shame involved with it.
Yeah.
So I went across the country talking about this when I had opportunities, and also videoed and interviewed people as well that would be willing to share, that were in that world or had experiences in that world. So the athletic part was, it worked for me because I liked and thought of and had some experience doing things sort of like that.
Yeah.
So that's why it seemed like it would fit me, but really that wasn't. I have had that adventure now. I became the second person ever to cross the country on an elliptico. I learned.
Really? Just two people?
Yeah. Well, at that point, I can't speak since then because this was in 2021. But at that point, I was, and the reason there's only one company that makes these things, and that's the information I'm basing it on. Is from them.
Yeah.
And so the cause was, we talked a little bit earlier about purpose and those sorts of things. That was what motivated me. It did fit into my wheelhouse of the type of thing that I, have exhibited some interest in. but it was the whole purpose of it was to draw attention to this. And we raised some fair bit of money for, there's 4 different causes that were all related in this field. 1 here in Salida, 1 in Asheville, and 2 national organizations.
Okay.
I had a niece who was going to the Kennedy School at Harvard, and she got me linked up with someone there that I would otherwise not have been linked up with. So I wasn't actually sponsored financially at all by Harvard, but it
Supported.
was supported through their communication channels, their email list. And
oh, that's cool.
That was it wasn't as, I'd hoped it would become really big. I didn't have any. I was trying not to put a ceiling on it. I'll put it that way. I also didn't have a floor or basement to it.
Yeah.
I mean, I tried to enter it without any expectations because I had no idea. I had not done anything like this before, but I felt very gratified by the exposure that we got.
Yeah.
And I'm just one little small grain of sand on the bank of people that are, now making some efforts in this area, and it has gradually, I think, been improving the issue of the stigmatization of this disorder. But I got to put my little grain of sand on the bank, and it was.
I love the way that you word that, because I don't think there's enough talked about the fact that it is a brain disorder, that the people that suffer are not weaker or less than, as you put it earlier. It is a brain disorder that it's difficult to overcome, but you also pointed out that it can be overcome. So I want to ask this question: if there is anyone listening that themselves or has a family member that is clearly struggling from this, what would you say to them? Where would you direct them, or what kind of things would you relate to them?
There's a lot of services now that can help you if you're a family member. I think educating yourself. One book that comes to mind, Anna Lemke is a psychiatrist at Stanford who wrote a book. I think it was titled Dopamine Nation.
Dopamine Nation, yep.
I believe. But anyway, she's a good resource to helping to understand the brain aspects of what is happening. And I think what you just pointed out, though, is to me the critical message, that it's the stigmatization, I think, comes from this perception that because I don't suffer with this, it used to be back in the Reagan days, I think it was just say no. Okay, now in some ways that's not a bad message, but underneath it, what lies underneath that is this presumption that if you don't say no, then it's because you are either too weak or don't have the moral character. It's either a moral failing or a character weakness, when all you have to do to not fall into this hole is just say no. Now, I will say, if you never did try these substances, well, you'd be blessed, and that 10% or so that are going to be particularly vulnerable to it aren't going to fall into that hole. But for a message for rescuing people or having people, pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, so to speak, it ain't going to happen. It just doesn't happen that way. It's too hard. It's harder. What I would tell people after Joel's death was Joel was stronger, and his getting rid of his fight, winning his fight for a couple of years after struggling for, I guess at that point it had been 8 or 9 years. His winning that fight against substance use disorder and becoming clean was harder than anything I have ever done. Getting my doctorate, running the Leadville 100, doing the elliptical across the country, none of them compare. In some ways, people that do succeed with this, I think, should be celebrated. And yet it's not usually that way, because it's not. It's more viewed as, well, you got yourself into this, now you climbed back out of the hole, now you're just back to ground zero. Yeah. But then it's a lifetime struggle too. It's one of those things with Joel. We were always nervous about that, but we had just begun to breathe and exhale. Josh, we were actually in China when that happened.
Oh my gosh.
And we got the call. from our local police who had been contacted by the state police in Illinois, where he died. And the reason I'm bring up the China part is in that we had just begun to exhale. We had, in the first year, we're on sort of pins and needles, and then the second year, we're beginning to give up some of our worry, because we were always worried we were going to get that call. For 7-8 years, we were worried about that happening. And then we relaxed and we went away, went abroad, and that's when it happened.
Yeah, and I think obviously devastating to get that at any point, but to have just gotten to a point to feel like you can live a little and go do something that you wanted to do, it digs it even that much deeper. But to me, that makes what you have done even a brighter star of a message, because it'd be any kind of trauma like that in a family. It's just as easy to dig a cave and stay in it than it is to turn around and turn it into a bright star of a message. And I think what came to mind as you were telling this story is, as I mentioned earlier, the second mountain, this interweaving and overlapping of passion and ability and wisdom. You didn't know that this was going to happen to your family, but your experience of doing these ultra endurance events your entire life allowed you to then do this thing that created a platform to spread the message and maybe reduce the suffering in the world a little bit by doing that. And that part is beautiful to me. And I think you should get a lot of kudos for that, but I know that's not why you did it. I just would love for that message to continue to be spread, and hopefully this is a platform to do that. So,
well, thank you, Josh. I appreciate those words. And yeah, it's easy. I can still start to fall into that cave that you mentioned. It's been 5 years, but it doesn't. It never goes away. I mean,
right.
It's what you do is you go forward with it. So the hole is created when this happens. You never fill the hole. What you do is learn how to walk with it inside of you. But one of the things that can help me get out of it some is to remember what Joel wanted to do and would have still been doing, and I'm sure much more effectively than I in playing in this arena. And that is trying to help those that suffer from a similar affliction. And so the in Joel steps, I'm just continuing to try to walk in the steps that he created. And when I remember that I am perpetuating what he was doing, continuing some of his work in this world when he passed away, I feel like I am continuing to then honor him by doing what he would want to see done.
That is, the story doesn't end. And I know that will be a message that you don't, as long as you're breathing, you probably will not stop trying to help those that suffer from a similar thing. I'm curious a little bit though. I know this most recent adventure that you went on, we're going to talk about that here for a few minutes, but does that play into you coming out of this story with your son and the trip across the country and spreading this message to try to help those suffering? And I'm not being very clear here. Your next thing that we're going to talk about is you spent time going around the world, really as a story capturer, talking to people in different places. And so if I could be succinct here, the question is, was that a jumping off from this previous event, or is it something totally separate that you wanted to just try and do?
It's a good question. I would answer it maybe by saying no and yes, in the sense that it wasn't directed specifically at substance use disorder, but that had opened my mind to the experience of what other people are when they experience a stigma, when they experience a preconception, basically a prejudice, a judgment from people that are outside that world. And that seems So in this sense, it is related. It's not substance use disorder directly, but I think what piqued my interest was today the climate has become so, just even within our own country, divisive and polarized.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people talk about that, but it does seem to be a real phenomenon. But then if we apply it to, around the world, we, and I'm including myself in this, often have preconceptions about other countries or other
Yes.
nationalities, other ethnicities, just other people that seem to be quite different from us. So underlying all of that was this desire to, one, explore that, but two, to try to flesh out a fundamental belief that we are all human in the same way. We have the same desires, hopes, dreams, fears. They're expressed different culturally. They're expressed different in the environments we might grow up in. It's expressed differently for someone who's suffering from substance use disorder, but they're just responding in the same way that I would if I were in that world and captured that way. And I became intrigued by the idea of wanting to have discussions with others around the world. It was going to have to be in English because that's my one language. Fortunately, that's a good language to have if you're trying to travel around the world. But to have those conversations and just start to challenge my own perceptions with the hope that, so my tagline for this was collecting stories, story trek was what I called it, collecting stories of challenge and change for connection. Sometimes that includes something like circling the globe or traveling the world to collect stories of challenge and change. And the reason I was voicing it that way was trying to piggyback on Joseph Campbell and his hero's journey and ideas, just basic fundamental storytelling, which I'm not really a natural storyteller, but I was looking for something. What one question could I be asking people around the world? Not the 2, 3, or 10, which is what I started with. But then I realized, well, what we all have in common is that universal experience of being challenged by something, either because something has come into our world in our lives that was unexpected, maybe even undesired, or a challenge that we're seeking for something that we're pursuing. And then we might succeed or we might not. But out on the other side of that challenge is change. We are affected by what happened. And that to me was boiling down the hero's journey. It's often expressed in more stages than that. But to me, that's what it all boiled down to. And I thought, okay, well, let me take this around the world and just see what I get from it.
So I believe you told me you started with just your backpack, so this wasn't any sort of equipment. Really sounded pretty minimalist from the whole effort. And is that accurate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So some of the elements to me that were distinctive of it, or at least important to me, and I could, like some of the other things we talked about, it was just important because I just decided it was. It didn't need to be, but I wanted to be minimalist. I took a 24-liter backpack, and that was everything I had for almost 5 months was in that
5
pack.
months? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, what I've told people is and you can find lots of information online about how to pack and how to do just the one bag. A number of people who do one bag that's a lot bigger. They might go up to about 45 liters, a carry-on, in other words, on an airline. I wanted it to be small enough that I could fit it underneath an airline seat and that it could be a personal item. So basically what I carried, that was bigger than what you would call a day pack. It was still within the confines of a personal item size on almost any airline. There's some international ones where I would have to classify it as a carry-on. But the whole idea was never to be separated from my bag. What I didn't want to deal with was, landing in somewhere in Africa, say, and my bag doesn't show up because I've got to be without, because I curated what I carried very carefully. And it wasn't, I'm not going to say it's impossible to replicate, but it would have been significantly difficult to do that. So that was part of the idea. Another idea was that I did not plan anything on the adventure. So I kind of like we were talking about jazz, I improvised it along the way.
Yeah, the whole thing.
I had a flow in mind, again, kind of like jazz, you know where the basic chord structure is going to be. For example, some of my chord structure was to be in the northern countries, Northern Europe, started in Iceland while it was still summer. And then, then I could start working south some through the fall, and I could go to the Southern Hemisphere in early winter when they're early winter here in the Northern Hemisphere. And, it's pleasant weather down there. So I had this sort of vision of a track that I might try to follow, but my rule was I could never get tickets for a second place. I could only have the tickets for the next place. So when I left here in Colorado, the only thing I knew for sure was that I had a place to stay for 3 days in Iceland, in Reykjavik. And I was going to have to wing it from there. And
oh my gosh.
So I did. Another aspect was I never rented a car. So I was always on public transportation. And the idea there was to be able to force myself into more situations where I might be meeting more people instead of just going around solo in a car, which had been easy for me to just go sightseeing. With my car and be by myself.
How did you pick the places and the people to talk to? Okay,
well, when I started, I wasn't sure how that was going to work out. What I said was any expectations I have, that it all boils down to what I expect is I don't know what I'm going to find. In other words, I didn't know. So I just kind of winged that as I went along. I tried a few things that didn't work out at first or in the early part of the trip. What I found eventually was just having normal conversations with people and then segueing into these kind of questions that might be, something beyond of, where are you from and what are you going to see and that sort of thing. And I ended up with some really good conversations from people all over the world. The other thing that I found, which I don't think I didn't expect it. It's not what I was envisioning. I ended up going to 20 countries, but my vision was originally do something like, set up in a coffee shop or something. And I even had some little signs in different languages that I'd already made up.
That's actually a pretty good idea.
I thought it was. It ended up being totally ineffective.
So it's a terrible idea.
Yeah, well, it did not work for me. Someone else, maybe it would work great for. But for whatever reason, it didn't work for me. But what did work was just entering into, through proximity. You're sitting next to each other on the bus, the train, the plane, standing next to each other in a line, these kind of things, and just striking up just normal conversations that you might strike up anyway. But what I found was that surprised me, Josh, was that I pictured going to these different countries and those would be the people I would be talking to. What ended up happening, I talked to people from all around the world, but usually not in the country that they were from. So they would be tourists or travelers themselves.
Okay.
Those were the conversations that ended up being the easiest. And it kind of makes sense. I'm here in my world here in Colorado, and if I'm walking around Salida and there's someone visiting Salida and they want to strike up a conversation, I may, sure, but I'm often, out to do something. And so I might talk a few minutes and then I'm moving on. But, traveler, tourist, I like the word traveler better. You're out of your element. Everyone is, and you share that in common, and you can often strike up conversations more easily. So, for example, I stayed in a whole variety of settings, and one of the settings, I think it was in Amsterdam or Copenhagen, but anyway, it was one of those two, and let's say it was Copenhagen. I was in what was called, I think they called them social hubs, but it was like a hotel that had these very small capsule rooms. So, I mean, we're talking like 60 square feet or something like that, super small.
Like closet.
Just enough room. enough room for a bed, and a hanger is on the wall, and a little desk is in there, and with a small little hallway that you can stand in to change clothes. But they had big common spaces. So what would happen was everyone would go out to the common spaces, and it was often a young population. I was kind of an outlier at my age. A lot of them were the 20 to 30 somethings. And they'd be working and then get into conversations. And that's what I would do. I would just go out there and start writing some things and try to get in some conversations. And one was a Chinese woman named Xian, who was happened to be wearing a sweatshirt or t-shirt, one from the college that I went to. So she's in Copenhagen now. She's Chinese. So she's not just Chinese heritage. She is from China. But she grew up in China.
Wow.
But she's in school. So I went to Duke. She's in school in Durham at Duke. She's in Copenhagen at a table that I'm sitting at now, talking to her. She's studying international relations or something like that. Mm-hmm. And she wants to work in South America. So Chinese in Copenhagen, same school in North Carolina, and she's going to be working in South America. That was it. One of the fantastic things about traveling, like I got to do, was just realizing how big a place this world is. It's so easy to get into the bubble of your own community, and that community could be a local geographic community. It could be a community nowadays online. It could be a community of, hobbies or interests that you have. And those are all good and great. I'm not dismissing them in the least. I still engage in all those things and thankful for them. But just what a small microcosm that is of what is going on in the world. And there's some very international people out there. I've spent most of my life, well, all of my life in the US, a few times traveled out of it, but not a whole lot until this trip. I think I can say I have traveled a bit after this world trip, but there's a number of people out there that's just more the world they know. They're much more international, cosmopolitan than we in the US can be. Yeah. Partly because countries can often be smaller than we are, partly because it, much more proximate. We have two countries adjacent to us, but that's it. You go to Europe and you got a dozen countries that are within a train ride from each other, and they utilize that. They do that. Right. We take a car trip a few hundred miles. They go a few hundred miles. They might cross through a couple of countries on the way. Yeah. And speak 2 or 3 languages or 4 languages. If they're Northern European, they'll often speak 3 or 4 languages. So it sounds like some of these people were impressive in a lot of different ways, certainly different than the folks you're around in Western North Carolina or Salida, Colorado. From the one question you were asking, what was your big takeaway from spending the 5 months touching different parts of the globe and talking to such a wide variety of people? Oh boy, that's a meaty question there, Josh, and a good question. So if I can answer it this way, and we'll see if it answers what you're really getting at or not, but one of the things I came away with from the whole experience was I entered it with this idea of universality, the universality of mankind, the way we share these, same basic instincts and as I was describing earlier, desires, hopes, dreams, fears, with anyone, anywhere in the world. And that's really what I was focused and starting with. What developed, though, as I went from country to country, culture to culture, was just the dramatic differences between cultures around the world. It's not like I was unaware of that, but I don't think I was. It got really impressed upon me just how different it would be to grow up in Egypt, how different it would be to grow up in Cape Town, South Africa, where I was, or Zimbabwe, or Osaka, Japan. The range of cultural expressions and cultural attitudes, cultural preconceptions was just almost profound to me. And so that kind of layered on top of this universality. And I just became very impressed with just how impactful the culture that we grow up in, the environment that we grow up in is.
Yeah. Oh,
And
interesting.
then by the end of the trip, though there was a third layer superimposed on top of those two, it didn't violate or contradict either of those other two, which maintained to their veracity in my mind. But my last place that I was in was Cairns, Australia. And that's where the Great Barrier Reef is.
Hmm.
And so I got recertified in scuba while I was down there. And as part of that, you go out on a boat for 3, 4, 5 days. It was 3 or 4 days, I guess it was, on the Great Barrier Reef, doing your open water dives after you've done the pool training and classroom stuff. And going down to see those reefs underwater, what I was struck with was the variety of the fish, the variety of the life, the botanical life that I was seeing. But it was all in this harmonious whole that I could swim around the reef.
Yeah.
It'd often be pillars or something. You could literally swim, circumnavigate it. And you got these different layers with all these different creatures, from stingrays to the sharks were around, to turtles, to parrotfish, to, just the whole range of what you might find in a healthy ocean. And what struck me by that, Josh, and the reason I bring up that part of the story is then I realized, or I had this vision for how our world is. Our world is like this great reef, this big reef, and all these different cultural expressions are around the world. But if I could go around the world like I was going around this reef, if I could follow the metaphor, then it could be a harmonious whole, even though we have the same basic desires, needs, etc., that universal base. We have that layer of culture that's so different that we grow up in, where we really see things differently, depending on where we are or how we've been raised, the world that we see. But on top of that, we all can be a harmonious whole and be integrated into this one society, this world that we call the earth, our home. And it made sense to me, and it was inspirational to me, and it was comforting to me in the midst of the variety of conflicts and polarized views that we hold so dear, or that we see around us and as part of the climate that we're in, to just be able to step back a bit and see that, yes, this can all be integrated.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, one way is the better way. This culture is better than that, or this political view is better than that, or this religious view is better than that. That just didn't seem true to me. And so that harmonious nature of the reef became the visual metaphor for how I ended the trip.
I think that's really cool. And as you were saying that, I wondered if you were going to get to a point of saying, in fact, the diversity was so great that it really wreaked havoc with the original hypothesis that all of us are the same. But as you finish, what my mind tends to go to math equations. So what I envisioned was, no, actually, hypothesis one of we're all the same, plus the idea that we are all extremely different, actually equals this beautiful aliveness of a barrier reef, that you don't get that without the first two things being 100% true. And I've never thought about it that way. And certainly in at least in the news that gets made, it's the nationalism, whether it's nationalism or us versus them mentality. Those are the things that create the dysfunction around the world. But maybe what we all need to do is to take our own story trek, like once in our life, and discover what you had a chance to discover, and maybe the place would be a little bit better.
Well, I love lovely sentiment. I love your math equation. I hadn't thought about it in those terms, so that's I'll probably steal that from you and use that for my own playing with that a little bit. But I feel very fortunate that I got to do this, and I don't want it to sound too investigatory or too altruistic or anything like that because I love travel and
Yeah.
I wanted to see the world, and my wife isn't as interested in doing something quite as extensive as that. She'd like to go to a place for a couple of weeks and then return home. But I was open to doing more than that. But what occurs to me is, and what I do think is true, is that what I was finding in these different communities was just a wide range of people. And wherever we live, we've got a wide range of people with a wide range of experiences around us, and we can do our own little story trek within Salida, within Raleigh, within
Oh, I love
Hendersonville,
that.
where we were. And that kind of like I had the experience of being able to talk to other travelers, maybe the easiest, they were the easiest ones to have conversations with, I think, in the end. We can approach our own community that way, and we can be sort of the traveler with in our own community and meet others that we are interacting with and encountering serendipitously. Just take the focus off of getting things done so much and just occasionally open our eyes and open our ears to who we might encounter that day. And that was the purpose of what I was out to do. And so I was always thinking in that way. But there's no reason you couldn't think in that way in this community in which you're in.
That's super encouraging.
And just trying to learn from other people.
Right. Yeah. I I'm going to guess you're an extrovert. Is that accurate?
Oh, well, actually, I'm exactly the opposite. I'm an
Okay.
introvert. However, I know they class some introverts as being,
A little more social, outgoing. Yeah.
or that they want that too,
Yeah.
But I'm definitely not. I'm in a lot of ways the classic introvert. So,
Okay. Yeah, I'm a pretty committed introvert myself, and so it's very easy for me not to do what you just described, which is, pick my eyes up from the task that I'm doing and pay attention to who's around me, and maybe even have a conversation with them. I mean, right. And so I think that's a great word to say. You don't have to travel around the world to do that. And in doing it locally, maybe it just makes our local cities that more kind. And so I think that's a really cool message. Let
I
me
like that.
ask you this just to wrap us up here, because we've been going almost an hour and a half, and which is longer than what I had
Oh, sure.
suggested to you. So I apologize
No,
for
I'm
misleading you.
fine. I'm fine.
What I've taken from your stories is that you have a huge capacity for uncertainty. That while there's parts of your life that you worked very hard to find the certainty and find the systems and the way things are, you have the ability also to come up with ideas that have no clear answer to them and then go pursue it, which I think in some ways is at the definition of what adventure is. And that's, I'm doing this podcast out of my own curiosity to talk to people that do hard things, that do things outside of the norm, that push themselves beyond a preconceived limit, only to discover something unbelievably beautiful on the other side that they never would have gotten if they hadn't pushed past that hard thing. And you've spent an hour and a half describing that in so many different ways, which has been great. What do you see yourself doing next in keeping up with this theme of uncertainty?
Well, so I can just list a few things that I've had in mind, but I really don't know. One thing I'm trying to work on is trying to combine some of the things I've done since retirement. I've had sort of 3 different projects now and tried to combine that into sort of a cogent narrative that connects the 3. So some of it is some retrospective work, but as far as a somewhat adventurous type of activity, we just recently bought a van camper, and one of the trips we want to take is to do the Alcan Highway into Alaska and tour around Alaska. And
Okay.
that would be done in a way sort of similar like the story trek, in the sense of not planning too much in advance, just sort
Mm-hmm.
of taking it as it came.
One day at a time.
Yeah. I love your description of adventure, and I would definitely second what you had to say. I do think maybe for myself, maybe you might have even given me some insight, like a little therapy session, that of I'm
Disclosure, I'm
very
not a
I'm
therapist.
but I'm very attracted to the uncertainty of adventure. But I think anything I do enter in that realm, I do try to implement systems and order
Hmm.
into it. And so maybe what I enjoy is the process. And so that's what I was going to finish with, on piggybacking on your comment and question, was that to me, it's not so much, so like finishing the story trek was great. I was ready to come home. Finishing the Elliptigo in Charleston was great. I was, maybe ready to be done. Finishing Leadville, and that the kind of ultra running, I'll just maybe not specify that one in particular because I did want to keep going on that particular race. But it's still good to finish. It's still good to
Right.
reach that goal. So reaching the goal is satisfying, but hands down, no exceptions that I can think of. It's the process that's fun.
Hmm.
It's the process of pursuit that is the fun thing. It's not you maybe had the goal to finish the AT, for example, and again, I'm not done that particular one, but I know what happened to me. The finishing the AT, okay, I satisfied that goal. That's great. It was it's the months in the process of doing it that matter. That's where the memories are. That's where the meaning is. That's where you wrestle with things and have the epiphanies and the experiences that you will always remember. It's not the finishing. And I guess I share that in that way to say that I don't think there's ever a failure. So let's say I'd run Leadville and didn't
Yeah.
finish. If I'd invested what I had invested into doing that and still didn't finish, okay, I was rewarded 99.5% of what I could have gotten out of it compared to what happened that I did finish it successfully. But the process, the leading up to it, the preparation, the thought, the companionship, I had people train with me. I had people come out here to run with me for it. Pacers, they're called, and support staff, support people that they came out with me. That whole experience would have been the same. And that's the part that I really remember. I got the belt buckle sitting on the counter right here. But I'm not saying it's meaningless, but it's not. I think as I look back over my life, it's never the ending or the thing you're pursuing. It's the process of pursuing it that
Gosh,
matters.
that's so good. That's so good.
That's where the adventure lies. Once
Yeah,
once once it's over, the adventure's done. The adventure
it's
is
done.
the doing of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's such a great perspective and a great way to end this conversation too. Just as a perfect summary of the life stories that you shared with us, that the goal itself really isn't as important as being present and paying attention to the journey itself as we go along. And I'll speak for myself only. I know that accomplishing goals as an end itself probably has taken up too much of my attention over my lifetime. And I think you're right. You miss out on all of the benefits of the journey itself when the end goal is the only thing that you think about. And that's a great word.
Yeah. Follow your curiosity, find those goals that you care about, those adventures that inspire you, and just engage. And it doesn't really matter how it comes out after that. Let it play out. I mean, invest yourself into it.
Hmm.
I think that's necessary. You have to really want it and really pursue it and have some effort, have some challenge, have some hardship.
Yeah,
But what happens in the end doesn't really characterize what the final experience is along the way. So,
that's great. Well, if anyone wants to find you online? Are you findable? Do you have Instagram, Facebook, any of your stories? Have you posted those anywhere online?
The only regular stories I posted was in Joel's Steps, and that website is still there. It's injoelssteps.com. It's actually one S. I had the other site point to it with two S's, but INJOELSTEPS.com. And
Okay.
I chronicled that particular trip. And then that's still probably the thing I care about the most. The story trek stuff I'm working on and we'll probably put up somewhere. But yeah, it's
cool.
really just that website. I am on Facebook, but I hardly go on. So
you got too many other things going on to.
you could
on Facebook?
You could find me on there and hit me up, but I can't say that I'll even notice that you made a request. I would eventually notice, but it might be a while.
I love it. All right, Clay, thank you very much, and you've been more than generous with the extra time. But these stories have they've been great, super clear and humble, but with a lot of wisdom. And that's one of the things I love about having these conversations, that if nobody else listens to this, I'm inspired. Like this has been really good. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll have to do it again sometime.
Well, Josh, thank you. You're a good interviewer and a good conversationalist, and I've enjoyed meeting you for this maybe in some loose way we stay in touch. I have a son in Raleigh, actually.
Okay. All right. Very good.
Oh, I noticed that you were in Raleigh. So
yeah. So, and I look for any reason to get to Colorado. So one way or the other, maybe our paths will cross in person.
Well, I would love that. And you've got a place to stay here if you decide to come to Salida.
Cool.
So or this part of Colorado, just let us know.
Cool. All right,
Josh.
Clay, thank you very much. All right. Thanks for listening. And I sincerely mean that, because I'm extremely grateful that you choose to spend this time with me. I don't take it for granted, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you want more content like this, be sure to check out material on my website at ridgelinewealthadvisors.com. That's advisors with an ORS. And sign up for my monthly newsletter, The Money Trail Guide, which you can find on the blog page. Until next time, I hope you pursue your own great adventure.